Hello everyone, welcome to another Haddonfield Survivor tier list video. I made the first one of these like a year and a half ago after Season 7. I updated it after Season 8, and what do you know? We just had Season 9, got updated again. Probably for the last time, probably. Anyway, regardless, let's get to the video. So what you're looking at right now is where the rankings were at the end of my last update, after Season 8, so not including the new season, and also not including any changes I might have had about people just in general. I did update the pictures, obviously. You can see the nice Season 9 pictures for all the people who showed up to Legends. So let's just get right into the rankings. So I'm going to start by changing around the people who didn't participate in Legends. So, if I just had changes of opinion on those players, going to move them around first. Then we'll talk about all the people who were on Legends. Something I want to note before I actually start is I feel like I was thinking about it before the video, and I feel like a lot of these players are a little too high. Maybe it's just how I'm feeling today, but I feel like I'm going to be trying to kind of average people out, move it a little bit more down, because I feel like there's not enough people in like that FD tier spot, and maybe I'm just mean, but I feel like there's some people that probably should have been in the first place. But of course, some people are going to move up also. It's not going to be all me being mean. And again, as always, this is me ranking people as a player overall, like how they would do on multiple appearances based on what I've seen from them. It is not a ranking of how I feel about these people at all. It is also not a ranking of how they played on specific seasons. It's just grand scheme of things, how I think they are as Survivor players. Alright, so we're going to begin in the F tier, and I'm actually going to be breaking the rule that I just said I was going to be doing, and I'm actually going to move Kevin out of F tier. Now, he obviously didn't do anything in the time since my last video, but I just feel like he never actually did anything wrong other than like just being really passive, and that's not really enough to be in F tier, which is where like our actively bad players belong. I'm also going to switch Alex and Vinny because Vinny at least tried to play the game. Yes, Alex survives one round of gameplay, Vinny doesn't, but Alex just didn't try at all, so like, he doesn't really deserve to be above someone who at least tried to play the game. Alright, next change on the list. I mean, a lot of these D tier players are going to stay kind of in the same spot. I am going to switch Ted and Isaac. Not really for any specific reason. It's just like my opinion on Isaac kind of went down a little bit. I mean, he's an incredibly passive player. My opinion on Ted's game didn't really go up, but he also, like, at least was in a majority in one season he was playing and got pretty far, so he's not active either, but, just a minor change there. Alright, so next we're going to go right to the C tier, and this is kind of a large change on the list, and again, it's not because anything new has happened, it's just because a lot of my opinions on, like, the Season 6 players kind of went down. I don't really know why, it's just, like, I feel like a lot of them had more messy games than I remember, so I'm moving Ari down all the way to, like, middle to the bottom of C tier. I don't really know why I was so high on her game. I mean, she was in the majority, but, like, never really getting her way, and she gets blindsided pretty early in the merge, so, like, not that impressive of a game, and, like, she didn't really have that many other alliances other than her pre-existing ones, so I don't know. She played kind of a mid-game, so definitely C tier makes more sense to me. I'm also going to move Samir down. I mean, I've always defended Samir. I think he actually played fine on his seasons. He's honestly a relatively unlucky player based on the 2 appearances we saw of him, but, like, it's just that, like, we didn't really see him do anything, like, that impressive. Like, he does have some potential in the game, but potential doesn't really mean I should be putting him in the top couple tiers. Like, he definitely belongs alongside these other, like, kind of mixed players, like someone like a Steven or a Declan, who, like, could play well, but also have the potential to, like, not know what's going on, so C tier makes a little more sense to me. I'm switching Ryan and Caleb. Not really much to this. It's just that, like, I don't think Ryan played that good on Season 6. And not that Caleb played that good on his seasons. It's just Caleb's really passive, but he did get to Final Tribal twice and is kind of good socially. Alright, moving on. I'm actually keeping all of the B tier people, other than the ones we aren't getting to yet, in the same spot. So we're going to move right to A tier, and this player, who's probably not watching this video, so probably doesn't care, but they might be upset if they did find out. I'm moving O'Sheen down to B tier. The thing about O'Sheen is he played good on the first season, but it's season 1. It, like, barely counts. And season 3, season 4, pretty bad. And season 5's fine, but, like, he's mostly good socially. He doesn't really play that strategically. And yes, he would have won that game, but he basically just sits there and, like, is a likable presence. So, like, yes, he's good socially, but I don't know how actually strategic he is, and he's not really that good at getting out of sticky situations. So I don't know. That kind of reminds me a lot of like someone like a Ben or even an Evan, where like they have some good instincts, some good social awareness, but largely passive when it comes to strategically, and like they don't really do a whole lot in the game. So I would say B tier, but the top of B tier, because he has showed that he's like can control the game when given the right situation. Alright, that's actually it for all of the players that weren't on Legends. Obviously, a lot of these players are going to move around a little bit because I'm going to move the Legends players, but for the most part, they're in the right spots in relation to the other non-Legends players, if that makes sense. Alright, so let's get into the Legends people. Like last year, I'm just going to go in reverse boot order. So, starting off with the first boot, we got Dan, who I had at the bottom of C tier. Dan got first boot, obviously, and he's done that before. He's a pretty bad player, obviously. Obviously, I love Dan. Big Dan fan. But as a Survivor player, if we're being realistic, I think C tier's a little generous, because I think his Season 8 run is kind of a fluke, and he's not active strategically or socially at all. He's okay physically. I mean, he wins challenges, and people do like him, but that's not really enough. Like, I think he's going down to the top of D tier. I mean, it's kind of the same spot, but I think D for Dan was always the right call. I think moving him up was a little premature. Okay, moving on to the second boot, and that's Harry, and this is kind of weird because he's right next to Brian, who we're supposed to be talking about later, but I guess I'll just talk about both of them right now, because it would be stupid not to. So, Harry's moving below Brian. He's not really changing his spot. I mean, he did poorly this season. He wasted an idol. He got blindsided. He had a pretty good tribe, in my opinion, and kind of squandered that. I think as time goes on and we see him in Season 8 and Season 9, it kind of makes me think that his Season 6 game was really like a best case scenario thing where he had all his friends there. He controlled the game, but like there were points where he could have lost that control. So seeing the other 4 games, and obviously the first 2 he was pretty young for, and he does get to the end, but the other 4 that aren't Season 6 are not that good. Harry's an extremely inconsistent player. He's not very good socially or strategically either. I mean, he's okay strategically, but I don't think he really gets Survivor that much. Kind of similar to a certain other person who's right next to him. But, you know, he still has some potential in the game. He's shown that he is competent strategically in some aspects and is okay at challenges, so I'm still going to put him at the bottom of B tier. I mean, a lot of these players at the top of C tier haven't really even proved that, so... And Harry did win the game, so I think B tier is fair. Obviously, I had Brian right next to Harry, and he's actually going to move ahead of Lauren also. Brian showed some consistency. I mean, he's not the craziest player in the world. Like, he's relatively passive and kind of oblivious to what's going on strategically, but again, he's an incredibly good social player, very likable. He makes alliances with a lot of people. Like, he had an alliance with Chris that he probably should have not had, but whatever. He was good with Jane and Michael. I mean, he's good at the social elements of the game. I'll give him that. He's a palatable person to most given casts. I mean, he showed that he could get far without all of his friends, so that's good. So honestly, I mean, he's not that strategic, so he's still a B tier player. He's definitely more passive than a lot of these players in the A tiers. He's kind of on par with like a Benner and Evan. I would say he's a little less strategic than them, but like a little less likely to go home early, so he ends up around the same place as them. I'm putting him below them because I think active strategic gameplay matters more, but that's just my opinion. Okay, getting back to the actual boot list. Next up, we have Chris W., the All-Star winner. And sucks to say, because he did go home early this time, I'm going to move him down. Top of B tier, a little below Oshin. Uh, it sucks because Chris is such an interesting player, and I always love watching him play. He's really good at trying to play like the Boston Rob game, but like Boston Rob, it doesn't always work out for him. And obviously, he came into Legends with a huge target on his back. I mean, as one of 4 winners and like someone who was pretty unconnected, he was kind of primed to be taken out really early. So I'm not really going to fault him for that, but the thing is, like, he's a pretty inconsistent player. I mean, his strategy worked once and it didn't work 2 to 3 times. I mean, season 3 is a little bit more in the middle, but I feel like that level of inconsistency can't really put him in the A tier. He kind of has to be in the B tier alongside someone like an Oshin. I think him and Oshin are actually relatively similar players, even though they didn't get along on their seasons. And they're just upper B tier players. What can I say? Like, they're more active than the lower B tier players, but they're too inconsistent to be put in with like these A tier players. They do have a lot of strategic acumen, pretty good social work, but the inconsistency pushes them down to B tier. All right, next up. So I'm supposed to be talking about Elliot because he's the 4th boot, but I'm actually going to save him for later because this A tier I'm going to talk about all together. So we're actually going to talk about Carson, who is going to move up. I mean, he didn't have a great showing on Legends. He was the merge boot, but I'm going to put him up here above like that Declan Stephen Phillip area. He's an active strategic player to a certain extent, and he kind of gets the game of Survivor. Obviously, he's a big fan. He's okay socially, but I do think he still has that issue that like he could be an early boot on any given season, so that's a level of inconsistency I can't really reconcile. And there hasn't really been a game where he's shown dominance. Like season 8, he was kind of a passenger. Season 9, same thing, and he gets taken out in a bit of a fluky way. He was kind of the backup plan, but I'm not really going to fault him that much for his season 9 game. I mean, it did show me a level of consistency. He made the merge. Mind you, he only really survived one tribal, and he was on the outs for it. He voted with Chris when Chris went home. So I don't know. The thing is, the reason I'm moving him up is because, yes, he actually knows the game of Survivor and is kind of good socially, like, to a certain extent. Not anything crazy like some of these players up in A and B tier, but he's good socially. I think he actually belongs kind of like, he's like kind of similar to like a Caleb or a Ryan, honestly. A little bit of worse of a version because he's only mid-final tribal once, and I don't think he had as much agency. I mean, not to say that like Caleb had that much agency on his seasons, but Carson's a little bit too much of a passenger player for me to put him higher on the list. And that strategy does work sometimes. I mean, look at Parker, but the fact that he's been an early boot sometimes and the fact that his strategy's never really worked out for him keeps him down here in like the C tier range. Okay, so I know I said I was going in reverse boot order, but we're just going to talk about the other player that's not up in these top 2 tiers next. So that would be Michael. And Michael, pretty clear legend. Obviously, he was the least qualified player on the season, if you don't count Dan. But Michael did really good. I mean, not really good. Like, he didn't play that good strategically, but he did place well. He got 5th place, won 2 immunity challenges. That's something to be proud of if you're Michael. So I am going to move him up. He's going to be a C tier player. I'm going to put him around where Jason is. I actually think him and Jason have a lot of similarities. Early boots some seasons. They had 1 deep run each, and that deep run kind of involved challenge wins and not really being active strategically, but they are likable presences, and have the potential to do well. I think the thing about Michael is he doesn't really get the game to a large extent. Like, he knows what not to do. Well, he knows what not to do now, but he's never really been the driver of strategy ever. He's good socially, though. He's definitely a C tier player at this point. I think he's learned the game over these last 3 seasons. I think he's gradually gone up in my estimations, and I think he still has potential. I think if he played again, he could go up to like the top of C tier or B tier. But as of right now, he's a lower C tier player. Okay, we're now going to talk about these top 2 tiers, which I'm going to just all talk about at once. That's why I saved all these people. So first up, we're going to start by talking about Elliot. And if you didn't already realize, I'm actually redoing this section of the video. Through talking about it, I was actually going to keep Elliot kind of in the same spot, like mostly, but I actually feel like Elliot didn't play that well and kind of showed me some pretty massive glaring holes in his game. And I mean, overall, I'm still relatively confident in Elliot. I mean, Season 5, Season 6, he controlled his original tribe. He's a really good social player and can be good strategically if he shows up. That's the problem, though. He didn't show up to Legends. And I do think he's kind of aloof in the game. Like, when someone else challenges him for power on his tribe, he kind of usually doesn't know that that's happening. Like, you look at Legends, Aiden kind of was undermining him at every opportunity. You even look at, like, something like Season 4. I mean, he was completely undermined by that, like, Cyrus and Will group. Season 5, too, I mean, you got Chris undermining him. He was unaware of the fact he was getting votes and had 2 idols that he didn't play. I mean, there are some holes I feel like I just have been overlooking about Elliot because he is so affable socially and pretty big jury threat on most seasons, and it can be a dominant strategic force. I just think I've been a little too high on Elliot, a little too generous, and Season 9 kind of was the tipping point. I think he's staying in A tier, though. I mean, I'm putting him down here near Jane. I think the thing is, he's a more active strategic player than Jane. Obviously, he comes up as more of a target and has more of a potential to get blindsided earlier than Jane, but, you know, active strategic gameplay is obviously what I care about, and he does have the potential to do that. And they're both pretty affable socially, so I actually think Elliot's just like a slightly more strategic version of Jane. Pretty similar players. And honestly, while we're at it, we can just talk about Jane, because Jane's staying in the same spot. I mean, yes, she didn't get 4th, she got 6th this season, broke her streak. However, she basically played the same game. And honestly, this one was pretty good, maybe her best game. I'm not totally sure about that, though. The thing is, she had good relationships, she was really well insulated on the Purple Tribe, and even at the merge, she was in a pretty good spot with, like, Max and Chris and stuff, so I think Jane played pretty well. The thing is, yes, she maybe let Max go around too early, a little bit manipulated by Chris, but she still had Michael and Brian going into the final 6 round. And honestly, she would have had Chris had it not been for the jury tainting his opinion on her and Michael, which, like, am I really going to fault Jane for that? No. I mean, had Chris voted with Jane and Brian and Michael, had the 4 of them voted at Dom at Final 6, I think Jane's in a pretty good spot, because I think at that point, like, Michael probably goes home the next round. Maybe. I mean, I don't think Chris would vote her out over Michael. And then she's in a prime position in the Final 4 where if she doesn't get eliminated in Fire, which of course she probably would because she's always getting 4th, she probably does good at Final Tribal if she gets there. I think the thing is, like, Chris might have been a jury threat to her. Like, maybe she loses to Chris, but I actually think she beats someone like an Aiden, who was not very well respected this season. She probably beats Michael, too, because they have a similar underdog story, and people probably thought she was a better player than Michael. So I actually think this season didn't really change my opinion of Jane, and really just reaffirmed that she's an A-tier social player, pretty okay strategically. She's just not super active, so she has to stay right here in the back. Alright, staying in the A tier, the other player we have to talk about is Dom, who I'm moving ahead of Makai. I know people don't like Dom and think he's slightly annoying in his confessionals and also slightly overrated. However, come on. You can't put a player who made Final Tribal 3 seasons in a row and has never been voted out any lower than the top of A tier. Yes, you have someone like a Caleb, who also has only ever made to Final Tribal, and he's not that good. But the thing is, Dom is a pretty strategic player. He's a pretty dominant force. Like, he's one of those people who pretends that he's, like, paranoid and, like, not knowing what's going on, but is actually extremely meticulous in what he's thinking about the game. Dom obviously has some pretty big flaws, one of which being his speaking ability at the end. He's very bad at articulating his game, even when his game is really good. Like Season 7, he totally played the best game and should have won. He just had no idea how to convey that to the jury, which is a flaw, but it's not like as big of a flaw as like most players. He's just an incredibly consistent player. He's pretty good socially. I mean, you see him make relationships with people he doesn't know, Max. I mean, he's not as good socially as a lot of these players, like Jane, Elliot, Chris, like some of Mackay, but he's shines strategically. I mean, his navigation through the game is pretty impressive. Yes, he's had Aiden there with him, but I mean, Season 7, he didn't really for half of it, and he still was able to control strategically. So, pretty confident in him. I mean, yes, he has the issue of not being able to win the game, but I'm still mostly confident in Dom. He's a pretty good player. He's staying here in the top of A tier. Alright, so I'm moving Chris up to S tier, obviously. I mean, maybe too premature, but he's going to stay at the back of S tier. Chris is a great social player, great strategic player, very active, very much like someone who pushes for what he wants. He usually recognizes his correct move that he should be making. I'm extremely confident in Chris. He's definitely an S tier player. I think the reason I'm not putting him ahead of these other three players is I think he's slightly less like amendable to random people he could be given. Like, I think these three people like would thrive on any given tribe. Like, say Chris was given like Dan and like Ted, like, some random people. Like, I feel like Chris would have a little bit more trouble like amending to those type of players, but I'm still very confident in Chris. He's extremely active. And that brings me to Max, another player from Legends, and moving him down below Aiden. Max is obviously an incredibly impressive player. He played possibly the most impressive game on Season 3. I think he's kind of similar to Chris, honestly. Like, I feel like they're both very good socially and strategically, both kind of dominant forces. I'm not going to fault Max too much for being outplayed by Chris on Season 9. I feel like Max didn't have many connections and also was like such a massive threat. So like, do I really fault him for that? And I feel like he got really unlucky on Season 5 with like that tribe swap. So he's largely a great player. I mean, you look at his first season, it's crazy good. The dominance is insane and his social ability pretty good. He does have a couple strategic missteps, especially on Season 3 when you look at like the end game. Like, his navigation through the game is not always perfectly clean, and there's a couple times where like I question his decision making. So Chris might actually be a better strategic decision maker than Max, but I just think Max has more ability in the game. He's more flexible. I think that I trust Max a little bit more on any given season, but realistically, they're pretty much in the same spot. Like, they're kind of interchangeable to me at this point. And there we go. That takes us to our last two spots on the list. And I did think about moving Aiden up to number 1 ahead of Cyrus, but I'm not going to do it. I have to keep Cyrus at number 1. Yes, Cyrus didn't show up to Legends, and he should have proved himself, but whatever. He's still the greatest Haddonfield Survivor player of all time. I mean, Season 4 is the greatest winning game of all time in Haddonfield Survivor. Completely controlled the game. Pretty flawless. Season 5, despite him being a massive threat, he has a good amount of control and plays a pretty good game. He's pretty dynamic. I mean, he makes a social relationship with a lot of people who he's never met before. He's really good strategically. He has an alliance that goes against Will's alliance pretty successfully in the post-merge. He makes moves a little bit too early, but honestly, it would have worked out for him if the other alliance didn't have an extra vote. I mean, he probably gets Final 5, and then he just needs to win immunity, because I do think Chris would have flipped on him at that point. But, I mean, Chris did that in the real scenario, so why wouldn't Cyrus have been able to do that? The endgame obviously has some flaws with it, but, like, again, he was a huge threat, so I'm not really going to fault him that much. He's just a really amendable player. I mean, he's basically the Tony Blachos of Haddonfield Survivor. He's very adaptable, very chaotic, pushes very hard for what he wants to have happen, but he's extremely successful and usually knows what his best move is. So definitely the player I have the most confidence in. He's staying as the #1 player of all time. So let's talk about Aiden, of course. So I did debate putting him #1, obviously. The thing about Aiden is he let go of the gas at the end of Season 9. He could have won the game. And that's the reason he's separated from Dom and Chris, in my opinion, because he is the one player in their trio that actually knew the dynamics. Like, you could tell when you listen to his confessionals that he knew the jury was not actually, like, as high on, like, Brian and Michael as they were letting on. He actually knew that Chris was his biggest jury threat and knew that he had to take him out if he wanted to win. Unlike Chris and Dom, who were very unaware of the social dynamics, Aiden was actually extremely knowledgeable about what was going on. The thing is, he just didn't do it because of outside of the game relationships. I mean, he didn't want to burn his actual friendship with these players. He knew that he could have gone to the end with Brian and Michael, and he would have won, but he just didn't do that. And I'm not really going to fault him for that because obviously he won the previous season and he was doing that because he wanted one of his friends to get the win, but, you know, it's a little underwhelming. I mean, the thing is, Aiden obviously controlled most of the first half of the game and was probably the best positioned player for most of the game, so still pretty impressive. And his Season 8 game is incredibly elite. Like, it's a Cyrus-level game. I mean, he had complete control from front to back. No point in the game where he was actually in danger of going home. The people he wanted to go home every round went home, for the most part. And I mean, I can bring up his Season 7 game, which obviously is less impressive because he gets voted out at the merge, but he does control his initial tribe completely, so, I mean, that's something. He's really good socially. I mean, compared to a lot of players, like probably even him and Cyrus are on the same level socially. Strategically also, too. I mean, the thing is about Aiden is I just think Cyrus is more of a killer instinct than Aiden. Aiden's a little bit more, like, kind-hearted. I mean, I'm not saying Cyrus isn't, but, like, Aiden puts more of his heart in the game. Cyrus is a cold-blooded killer when it actually comes to executing strategic moves, so he does have the edge over Aiden in that light. But overall, they're pretty similar, and I trust Aiden a lot strategically and socially. I mean, definitely deserving of being top 2. And there's honestly a pretty big gap between Aiden and Max in the S tier. I mean, I think these two players are very clearly numbers 1 and 2. And there we go. That is my Haddonfield Survivor tier list part 3 after Legends. And I hope you enjoyed the video. I mean, probably not going to update this again. So these are my final rankings of Haddonfield Survivor players. I hope y'all don't disagree too much, and have a nice day. Thanks for watching.